Welcome to the Expat Empire Podcast, the podcast where you can hear from expats around the world and learn how you can join them. Hey guys, before we get to the interview, I want to remind you that we're offering free 30-minute consulting calls to anyone interested in moving abroad. Whether you're thinking about retiring somewhere warm, starting the next chapter of your international career, or even becoming a digital nomad, we're ready to help you think through the next steps in your journey. Send us a message at expatempire.com and schedule a call today. With that said, let's start the conversation. Hey Andrew, thanks so much for joining us today on the Expat Empire Podcast.
Thanks, David. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you on the show. I know you've been on the list to be a guest for quite some time, and we know each other from way back in the day. We've basically grown up together, so it's awesome to be able to hear your story. Of course, I know good bits and pieces of it, but to be able to hear it from the beginning and to share it with our listeners as well.
Well, thank you. Happy to share.
Well, if you could tell us a bit about where you're originally from, where around the world you've lived so far, and where you're living right now, that'd be great.
Sure. So I live currently in Los Angeles, California. Born and raised in Los Angeles, and have actually spent most of my life here. I've probably lived in 5 or 6 different parts of the city that I'm happy to talk about. For anyone who's interested in LA, I know most of the corners of LA, but born and raised here, went to university here at the University of Southern California, and started my career here as well, working in downtown Los Angeles. In fact, the only place that I've lived outside of Los Angeles really is Germany, in Hamburg, Germany, where I've done some work, and I think is really what we're going to be talking about on this episode. I did spend some time in San Francisco. I think I had 4 3-month rotations up there. So I don't know if you throw that together and say 1 year in San Francisco, maybe that counts for something. But outside of Hamburg, Germany, I'm primarily Los Angeles.
Great. Yeah, we'll definitely get into your German experiences. That'll be the main thrust of today's conversation. But I know that you're also an avid traveler. So could you talk a little bit about your travel experiences and maybe how many countries you've been to, what's been some standout experiences for you, if you have any in mind?
Absolutely. So I took my first international trip when I was probably 18 years old to Germany, sort of symbolically, which has become a theme throughout the rest of my life and my career. And that was a trip I took with my brother. I was a kind of clueless recent high school graduate and really didn't have much of an interest in traveling or living abroad. I remember when my brother was trying to convince me to come on the German trip with him, and I was looking at the German, the hotel route when we were looking to book hotels and hostels and stuff. You know how they have the weird bed mattresses and what's the word? It's like the comforter. That's
Right.
Like an individual comforter, and they roll it up a certain way. And I was like, that looks weird. That doesn't look comfortable. Why do I want to go there? I was kind of trying to make every excuse as to why I shouldn't go on what turned out to be a 3-day trip to Germany. And the reason why we went was because it was a fluke airfare. I think we flew round trip from LAX to Frankfurt for $280. My standpoint was why am I doing this? I don't even know if I'm going to like it. I'm going to be miserable. My brother's was like, oh my gosh, $280 and you can see a new country, and you've never been out of the country before except for Canada maybe. So that was our first trip, and I was, colloquially or symbolically, I was bit by the travel bug at that point. And from then on, my brother and I took a trip at least 2 to 3 times a year, probably together went to 25 countries. And then at that point, sort of invigorated on my own, I started doing some solo travel myself. I went to South America by myself. I went to the Middle East by myself. In the end, ultimately focused on wanting to live abroad. And when I did live abroad, obviously did quite a bit of travel while I was there. I think in total, I've been to 45 countries all over the world: Asia, Africa, obviously Europe, Central America, South America. Probably standout travel experiences for me would be, I truly love Germany, and again, that's ultimately where I ended up living for 2 years. And I always, a lot of people say, well, why not Italy? Why not some of these other places that are more typical for Americans to target? And for me, Germany was just the perfect combination of everything to like about Europe, and its cleanliness and efficiency and quality, I'll say, as well as sort of the American spirit of work hard and pay off. And I just genuinely liked it there. I liked all the quirks, and That's the country that I had visited most often before moving there, and is still the place today where I'd love to go. And if I was going to pick any country to live in, that would probably. That said, there are a lot of great places to visit. Probably my favorite place to visit, and I've been there twice now, is Israel, the Holy Lands. I just think that there's amazing history there and amazing cultures and clashing of sort of civilizations and ideals, and it's amazing to just be a part of that and witness it. And there's just a lot of fun to be had there too. So I went there 2 years ago for the second time. But I also like Asia. I think that Asia is, if you're looking for just a complete culture change from the United States or a complete culture change from Southern California, hitting up an Asian city, whether it's Shanghai, Beijing, or even parts of Thailand or Vietnam, is just so different. The streets and the sounds and the smells and the food is just such a change from culture here in the United States. And I really find that it brings value. It makes me appreciate being at home more. Not that I like home better necessarily, but you really come to appreciate that there are places in this world that are truly unique, and that your life experience can be different based on where you live, and that determines how you spend your time, what you eat, things like that. And experience to travel the world and to experience other cultures.
Yeah, definitely. I know that's something that has brought us together over the years, and in fact that we spent some good months together while you were in Germany. So as we kind of move into that topic, because that'll definitely be the focus for this discussion, I'd love to know how you originally got interested in Germany. Of course, you had that first trip when you were 18, but if I remember correctly, you were also learning German back in high school. So how did that start for you?
That's right. So my grandmother was born in the U.S., but to German immigrant parents, and this was before World War I, which was the first war where Germany was the enemy of the United States. So she actually grew up in Indiana, speaking German at home. All the newspapers were in German. It was like very much Germany in the United States at that time. Now, once World War I happened, it was kind of like, we're Americans now. So, they started speaking English more, and the German publications waned and whatnot. But really, my grandmother started teaching me German at a young age, not so much to speak it fluently, but to just learn how to say good morning and good night, things like that. And it was always kind of part of our culture, part of our identity. I feel like as Americans, we often use our cultural heritage as sort of an identifying factor in who we are. And so for me, even though I'm only, I think, 25% German, that was always the one that I kind of grasped onto and said, oh yeah. And so that kind of led me to study German in high school. I ended up taking a semester in community college as well before I transferred to university. And that's kind of where, and at least in my mind, I lost interest in German, because I had taken these classes. I didn't have much of a desire to go visit these places. I was just like, okay, this is cool. Now let's move on and do something else with my life. But when I transferred to USC, there's a foreign language requirement as part of my degree program. And I actually tried to get out of that requirement because I had taken 3 years in high school and a semester in community college. And so I go to take the placement exam, and I was very confident and finished the exam very quickly and got placed right back into level 1. So I was like, darn it, I have to retake 2 semesters of college German at USC, paying exorbitant tuition, because I obviously didn't pay attention in high school. And so it was at USC that I actually started learning it. I don't know if it's like a third time's the charm kind of thing, or if I just had really good professors, which I would say that I did. But I pretty soon got to the point where I was actually picking it up pretty well. And people would say like, oh wow, have you ever lived in Germany? Because your conversation skills are good. And I took a few trips to Germany during that time as well. Sort of got to practice over there, and at that point really got the feel for life there, and realized that it might be something that I wanted.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other piece I would focus on that I think will come up later, but because this was sort of late in my college career that I started having an interest in German, I really didn't have an opportunity to study abroad. It was something that I probably, in hindsight, would have loved to do, but when you're a transfer student, you're trying to get in and out as fast as possible, and delaying one semester of tuition to go live abroad for a semester just didn't seem like a practical thing for me to do.
Right. So then coming out of university, so you started your career. I guess the plan was never initially for you to try to work in Germany. obviously that opportunity came down the road. But what were you thinking coming out of your degree program? And in fact, what type of career did you ultimately get into?
Great question. So, if you asked me what I studied in school, I'll tell you I studied accounting. If you asked me what I was interested in as a 22-year-old, I would tell you Germany. That was like my interesting thing. I was one class short of a minor in German in college. And so when you're at a party and people are like, "Well, what do you study?" It's like, "Well, my major is accounting, but I'm actually interested in German." That was a more interesting thing for me to talk about or be passionate about. But I was going down the CPA path, which is getting a job in public accounting, which is working for a large accounting firm and basically doing auditing and other type of accounting related work for large clients. But I would say when I was going through my recruiting season, my interest was to work internationally at some point. I didn't know what that would look like, where that would look like, but I actually chose the firm that I work for. I currently work for, in part because they had those type of opportunities. It's a global firm. We're located in 110 countries around the world, and when I was going through recruiting, I actually interacted with a lot of people who had either come to work in the US from abroad, from Ireland, from the Philippines, from South Africa, the UK, so on and so forth, as well as gotten to know people that were US based that did get to do work abroad, whether it was a rotation or a longer term relocation. So I went in knowing that that was always going to be a possibility for me. Didn't know what it would look like at the time, but it was definitely something that was a priority in choosing one accounting firm over another.
So, to that end, though, of course, when they're wining and dining you and you're in the middle of the recruiting process, they're going to say, "Oh, yeah, of course you could go to X country," in your case, Germany. They're going to say all of that stuff. But did you have a strong sense that it was really possible? Or was it kind of like, "Hey, it's nice that that opportunity might be there, but I recognize that the chances might be low, or maybe things don't work out"? What was kind of your thought process going into it?
So it's funny about the wining and dining. I know that you worked in corporate America for a while, so you're you're no stranger to the way that works sometimes.
Right.
But what it came down to again was being able to just meet people who had actually done it themselves.
Right.
It wasn't just a program that HR talks about that, like you said, "Oh, apply and we'll get back to you," kind of thing. I actually sat across the table with individuals who had made it happen and had their input as to how the process would actually work and how hard or easy it would be.
So then you started that career. Obviously, probably day one, I would assume you weren't saying, "Hey, Mr. Manager, Mr. Boss, I'm ready to go to Germany now." So how did you navigate those first couple years, and how did you set yourself up to be in a position to make it happen?
Sure. So I would say a lot of it was luck, but I can say with hindsight a few things that were really helpful. And again, this is probably specific to my career or professional services in general. But you come to learn that one of the easiest ways to get a job abroad is to have a skill that is not that is in demand somewhere else, because that just streamlines the visa process. And you can, similar to the H1 visa in the United States, you can cut in line in other countries, and that approval is easy. And one of those skills that is sort of inherently exclusive to the United States is the accounting standards that are in the United States. Being a CPA in the US, knowing US generally accepted accounting principles, which is sort of the language of an accountant here, is considered to be a very highly technical skill abroad. The reason for that partly is just the what, for better or for worse, it's the U.S. dominance in securities markets and the fact that U.S. listed companies, which have to report under U.S. GAAP by law, have subsidiaries all around the world, and all those subsidiaries need to be audited to the U.S. standards. So by being a U.S. CPA, you are sort of automatically qualified to have those special skills that other people don't have around the world. And for someone else to become a U.S. CPA is someone living outside of the United States is extremely challenging. And so that was kind of the ticket for differentiating yourself or setting yourself up from the standpoint of the receiving firm wanting you and being able to use you. As it relates to the U.S. firm that I was working for and kind of setting myself up for success there, it just had to do with taking on responsibility and showing that I could handle the tasks that they gave to me. Because
Hmm.
ultimately, the way that the arrangement works is that the U.S. firm sends you to a host firm abroad, basically on their recommendation. I can touch on this briefly, but my interview to go work in Germany was a joke for all
Mm.
intents and purposes. They basically wanted me to clarify the experience that I had, but
Mm.
there was no technical questions to stump me. There was no really, I would say, objective analysis of whether or not I would be a good fit over there. They
Mm.
were really taking my qualifications and my good standing in the U.S. firm as sufficient to bring me over.
So, how many years did you work at that firm before this opportunity presented itself? And I guess I should probably say, did it present itself sort of naturally, or how did you go about really making your intention known?
Sure, sure. Great question. Um, 4.5 years was the time I worked in the U.S. before I moved abroad. I did play a part in making it happen myself, which is not always the way it works, but probably one key takeaway for the listeners who might be in a similar situation is I sort of made this happen in reverse. So the official policy, if you look on my company's intranet page, is to talk to your local leadership and then apply for a program and then look for open slots that may be advertised. And then at that point, you would get in contact with the member firm abroad. And that's the way the process would work. And there could be quite a bit of lead time. And of course, nothing is guaranteed. I actually found someone who was already working in
Mm.
Germany for my firm as a U.S. We call them secondee. I don't know if that's a common term in the industries, but I went right to him, and people are always willing to help other people, and so I called him, American to American, more or less, and said, "Hey, I want to do what you're doing. How can I do this?"
Mm.
And he immediately put me in touch with the lead partners of the
Mm.
firm in Germany and basically started the process backwards. And so I got a little bit of flack from HR in the United States because they're like, "Oh, well, you were supposed to apply through us, but now they're calling me saying they
Mm.
want you over there. How can next time do it the right way?" But in the end, it doesn't really matter um, because that was them wanting me was the requirement to begin with, a formality. But then I think the other important piece is the firm that I worked for was large enough that I was a little bit more expendable.
Mm.
It's kind of, you don't want to do either work in a smaller firm or be in such a place where the U.S. can't let you go or doesn't have an incentive to let you pursue your own you know dreams, basically. And so I think that was another advantage of being at a firm that was large enough to be able to fill the gaps that I left, while at the same time equipping me to be um, in a position to be advantageous to the firm.
So it sounds like not only did you have the specialized skills, indeed, that would be useful in an international context, but on top of that, you were in a large enough company to where that, of course, they had the offices there in the first place, but then on top of that, they had the flexibility and really the slack to be able to allow you these opportunities. Is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the other thing I'll say, which sort of gets back to your question of how did I arrive at this? Did it just come out of nowhere? I was taking a solo trip. I was in Dubai, and I realized that one of my former colleagues who it was incidentally one of the individuals who, when I was going through recruiting, I
Mm.
had known that had worked abroad. I worked for her in the U.S. and then she moved to Ireland, and then she actually left my firm and joined another firm in Dubai. And her career, she ended up working in Dubai, then working in Prague,
Mm.
and has since repatriated back to the United States. But she had a great 8-year run of living abroad in several different places, all through a professional services firm. But I was in Dubai just by myself, traveling, and I met up with her for lunch, and she basically said, "Come over here. There's a lot of work here. I'll give you a job here." And that would involve switching firms, which was not something I necessarily wanted to do, but I was at the point in my career where I was like, if I'm going to make this happen, this is the time to do it.
Right.
So when I got back from that trip, I resolved that I'm either going to make Germany, since Germany was my first love, so to speak. I was going to try to make Germany work in my current firm, and if that didn't work, then I was going to switch to another firm and move to Dubai, because I thought Dubai was a cool place.
Okay.
In the
Yeah.
end, in the end, glad that didn't work out, but that was kind of, I would say that trip was the kick in the butt to get moving on this, and what ultimately resulted in me securing a position in Germany.
Did you find that it was competitive to get this role or one of these slots? And maybe you could even talk about it in a higher level across the company. Is it a situation where they need perhaps even more people to go abroad than are willing to, or is it so competitive that if you take a slot, then somebody else has to stay back and that type of thing?
It is not competitive at all.
Hmm.
And which is why this is, like I said, this is such a great path for those who want to find a way to work abroad. It is surprising to me. Now, granted, when I was pursuing this, I was single. I did not. I think I was no. I was on my own. There was a time when I was living at my parents' house, but as far as obligations go, I had no obligations. So for me, someone who wanted this was a very this was they didn't really have to sell me on it. But I was very surprised to learn how big of a decision this is for people that are a little bit more established in their life with families and kids and things like that, and that they really do have trouble filling these positions. There is, I mean, I can open up our intranet now and I can read off the different opportunities that are currently available. I know that they are very much undersubscribed.
Okay, so you secured that position. So it's great that you sort of had everything in hand. You went through the whole process. Did you have to do any sort of negotiations as far as what they would cover, any salary changes, title changes, things like that, to be able to make it work for you?
Yes, yes. As a matter of fact, and that's maybe one of the first lessons, at least specific to my industry. But Dave, I think that's probably part of your story as well, moving from Silicon Valley to Japan, is that dollar for dollar, without regard to exchange rates, the pay scale is just different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's especially true when you move to Europe because of the strong social safety net, because rent is generally cheaper than it is in large US cities, that it just costs less to live there, period. And you don't really realize that when you're looking around. And so I did take a little bit of a pay cut. They had first offered, their initial offer was quite a bit of a pay cut. I'll say it was probably 30%. And to agree to do that for 2 years was, in hindsight, I would say it would have been worth it. But, at the time, it seemed like it was a little bit of a step down, because in part you're working on moving up, getting incremental salary increases every year that are based, each one builds off of the other. So taking a sizable pay cut didn't seem like a good idea. In the end, there was a negotiation, and what's funny is what I was getting paid so I was a senior associate was my level in the U.S. firm, and what I was getting paid as a senior associate in the U.S., dollar for dollar, was so far outside of the salary ranges in Germany, that they actually would move me up to the next rank, which is manager. And so they basically did that. They agreed to bring me in as a manager instead of a senior associate. It brought my pay closer, although not equal to what I was making in the US. And it was sort of a lucky break for me, because it obviously looks good to have that title, and to be promoted early, more or less, even though it was purely a technicality based on trying to match my compensation. That said, once they did offer that concession, they pretty much didn't offer anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it was my living situation, that I didn't own a home and didn't have a family, but they basically offered me a week in a hotel when I arrived, and that's about it. Obviously my flights, but no moving allowance, nothing like that. Really,
Right.
Really, it was just, we'll give you a place to land for a week. We'll give you time during the workday if you need to go find your place to live, but 1 weekend you're on your own.
Got it. So one other thing that I want to touch on is, how important was it in the process to get this role that you actually already spoke such good German? Of course, that would seem to give you a leg up, but were there other people that had, for example, the guy or girl that you spoke to before you were able to get this role, that also, did everyone there speak German, basically, all the foreigners as well?
Actually, so surprisingly, no. When I was in Germany for the time, there were 3 other secondees that were there, rotating in and out during my time, and 2 of them didn't speak any German at all. Now, part of that has to do with specifically German business culture and German business culture at U.S. companies. Obviously, the expectation is that a lot of the emails and business communications between a subsidiary and the parent company are going to be done in English anyways. A lot of the documentation, ERP systems, and whatnot are in English anyways. So it wasn't that much of an issue. And as most people will know, that almost everybody in Germany has a good working knowledge of English anyways. So it was not a requirement. My interview to come over was conducted in English. My contract was written in English. They did like the fact that I spoke German. I think that they appreciated it more from the standpoint of being able to send me to clients and integrate me in the office more so than those who maybe don't speak German. But it was never a requirement. And in fact, it turned out to be a good balance for me because I've probably oversold my German language abilities up to this point in recording the podcast. But I would say I'm good conversationally. Once you get into extremely technical language, I just haven't picked that up yet. So I was able to do all of that technical stuff in English while still having the conversational business relationships in German, which I think.
As you said, so it sounds like a big part of your experience there was going to local client sites and being able to speak and work with these business owners and so forth. So could you talk a little bit about how the business life and the work life, and even your daily life for that matter, was different between where, the company and the office that you worked for in Los Angeles versus there in Germany? And by the way, which city did you go to? I should probably clarify that too.
Right. So I went to Hamburg, Germany. Hamburg is the second largest city in Germany. It's I think it's the most beautiful city in Europe. It's filled with water and canals. It actually has Hamburg as a city has more bridges than Venice, London, and Amsterdam combined. And it's right on the river that empties out into the North Sea. So it's just a beautiful place, Dave. I know that you've visited and you can attest to it. But it's also, second on the, it sort of has a second city status in Germany. And when Americans or individuals visit Germany, it's probably low on the list of places they go. People are more likely that they flew into Frankfurt, that they want to go down to Munich to see the beer gardens, the Black Forest, and obviously everyone loves Berlin. So Hamburg is typically not high on the list, and that gives it a very unique feel in that it is very German there. It is not. You go down to Frankfurt, you hear almost more English than German when you're walking amongst the skyscrapers. Say Hamburg doesn't have any skyscrapers. It's not that kind of a city. So it was a cool place, I think, to experience German culture and maybe get a more genuine look at it as opposed to some of the more business oriented cities in that country. As far as differences between the working culture in the U.S. and Germany, I mean, they're vast. Public accounting in the United States is very labor intensive. We work very long hours, traditional busy season. In Germany, they're typically limited to 40 to 45 hours a week. And to them, that is really busy. Whereas to me, I was coming from a culture where busy is 60 hours a week plus. I do think it's funny, incidentally. So, we've talked about public accounting or professional services as a way to move across different geographies and work. And if you look at the flow of where people are more likely to transfer, we see a lot of people from our Asian member firms want to come work in the US, because if you look at the difference in working culture, US is a net improvement to a lot of Asian working cultures.
Right.
And then you see the same thing in the US. So, going from the US to Europe is another improvement. So you don't see a lot of Americans that want to go work in Tokyo, say, or the Philippines, where they have beds under their desks.
Right.
So yeah, certainly appreciated the more relaxed working culture. One thing that I think is less relaxed, and this is probably just a German thing, is that they were very formal on working hours, when you show up, when you leave, and less autonomy in that respect. In the U.S., I don't have anyone who's checking when I show up and when I don't. And in Germany, I had a secretary that would call me if I didn't show up to work by 9:00 to see if I was still coming in. And if I was visiting a client and I forgot to put that, I actually had a schedule tracker that I would have to put in every day that I'm out visiting a client or on vacation or something like that. And, she would check that. And if I said I was going to be in the office and I wasn't in the office, I got a call or an email. And that is just not at all the way it works in the United States. The advantage is it's easier to, I guess, stand out in Germany because I was, you know, used to working weekends during busy season,
Mm.
and I would just work maybe 1 or 2 Saturdays during our traditional busy season in Germany, and get ahead on all my assignments. And my boss thought it was great because she had worked in the U.S. and thought that that's the kind of the way things should be, whereas all the other lazy Germans are off at 5 o'clock.
Right, right.
Well, I was going to say, I don't want to say lazy Germans because they are very hardworking, but I think that kind of puts a bow around the German working culture. Is they work very hard, but they work from 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock.
And how did they manage the busy season then? At least I know, as you're talking about how difficult and time consuming and intense it is in the United States, but were there any other adjustments that were made, or obviously they must still be tied to certain deadlines? So how did the business change to be able to enable that type of more relaxed working culture?
They just hire more people
Mm.
to do the amount of work.
Right.
It's if it's the same amount of work, they'll have a larger team, all else equal. And the benefit to that is that summers are nice and slow because
Mm.
they can't just trim the workforce because there's less work to do. So I know that personally, like I had abroad when I did not have a lot of work to do. But this being Germany, I still had to come to the office every day and stay my 8 hours, even though I was reading the news and whatnot. Whereas in the U.S., not only is it rare to not have as much to do, but even if I do have an afternoon where I don't have anything to do, I'll just take the afternoon off,
Right.
kind of thing.
So, did you get to enjoy that time then, as far as really digging into the fact that you were in Germany, that you were in Europe? Did you get to travel as much as you wanted to see the country? How did you balance that with these work requirements? Clearly, a more relaxed work culture could probably make that easier, but how did you kind
Right.
of think about navigating that alongside your professional responsibilities with your new title?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was a challenge because, um, like I mentioned, I didn't have the flexibility that I thought I would have to like jet out early on a Friday to go catch a flight somewhere,
Mm.
for instance. So I would say that adversely affected how often I traveled and what I could do. On the plus side, I had 6 weeks paid vacation, which seemed like so much back at the time. Coming from the U.S., where I think I had 3.5, and that was that was already with some seniority. So it was kind of a balance of taking advantage of this new quantity of time off, but also not being able to do some flexible kind of fitting trips in on the weekends that I had anticipated I would do. In the end, I mean, I still at least once a month took a personal trip somewhere. And then maybe 6 months into my rotation, I started taking on some additional responsibilities, which included being able or having to travel all over Europe for work, which turned out to be great because I could turn a work trip into a long weekend. I could, plan my trips in the middle of the week, say, and obviously buy myself some flexibility from the rigid German work culture, buy myself some independence that I wouldn't have if I was just reporting to the office every day.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that you ended up staying in Germany for about 2 years, but was that the plan from the get go? Or did you have to negotiate how long that would be? Or was it more open ended? How did you think about that?
So my contract that I signed was close ended for that period, and that's just the way those things worked. The nature of these type of arrangements at these type of firms is that you go over there for a fixed amount of time and then you come back. And ideally, like the U.S. firm benefits from your experience abroad, and the hosting firm benefits from having you there, and all of that. But I still remained an employee of the U.S. firm
Hmm.
legally throughout my entire time. That said, there were opportunities to extend, and in fact, there was an opportunity to stay there permanently
Hmm.
if I wanted to. That the partners had offered me. I chose not to for several reasons, and maybe we can get into that later. Some of them personal,
Hmm.
others professional, but there was definitely the option to extend if I needed to or if I wanted to. The natural sort of buffer for that is 3 years.
Hmm.
So after 3 years, IRS rules actually stipulate how your income is treated that you earn abroad. And so 3 years is kind of the maximum sort of temporary assignment
Hmm.
that you can do. Anything longer than 3 years is considered like permanent or semi-permanent, and there's a lot more red tape that you have to jump through on the U.S. side with regard to taxation and things like that. So the longest that any single contract would be is 3 years, and anything longer than that would be considered some kind of a. Even if there's an intention to unwind it in the end, they just have to structure it that way for tax purposes.
Got it. So, considering that you knew that maybe your time was limited, of course, it could have been extended, but you had some sort of assumption that it would be around 2 years, and you could probably safely assume that. How did you think about really diving into life in Germany and building a life for yourself there, making friends, doing things outside of work and outside of your personal trips to enjoy the feeling of living in that country, as opposed to always knowing that, well, I'll probably only be here for 2 years. So, did you invest in your life there?
Great question. And I'll answer just by saying that it's a challenge. When you know that your time is limited somewhere, yeah, there's just less that you do to invest in life locally. I would say that I tried to enjoy every day there, every weekend there, exploring parts of the city, and just doing things there that I know I would never do if I was visiting as a tourist. That said, I had two primary social outlets. First was obviously my work colleagues. Public accounting attracts a lot of young college graduates. So most of the people I worked with were, plus or minus 3 to 4 years the same age as me. And so those were the friends that I would primarily hang out with on the weekends. Obviously, we'd, work together all day, and provided social outlet. And I would say that when when you're building a friendship on the basis of, we work in the same place and we see each other every day, and we encounter the same problems, that kind of thing. I found that kind of friendship isn't really affected adversely by the fact that I was leaving. Like, I was no less likely to have lunch with a coworker if I was staying a week versus if I was staying a decade. It's really for me, it was the friendships outside of that were a little bit, probably neglected or less invested into because of the fact that I was leaving. But my other big sort of social outlet there was a English speaking church that I went to in Hamburg, and it was also similarly full of expats. Obviously being English speaking, but there was a lot of folks from not so much from the United States, but from other parts of the world that had moved to Hamburg for work or for school. In addition to it being, a church and having that spiritual element to it, it was also sort of an expat hub or an expat, social outlet.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know this is a different part of your experience there, but I'd like to talk a little bit about your long distance relationship, if that's all right. And I assume this also plays a role in why you decided to ultimately move back after your initial 2 years. But could you, if you're comfortable talking about it, could you talk about what that experience was like, how you decided that you would go into this long distance relationship, how you managed it during the time that you were there, and, basically made it work and have it, of course, continuing when you went back to the United States?
Sure. Well, I won't get into too much background with my current wife and our relationship before I moved to Germany, other than to say, we were obviously very close friends and were interested in each other, but both had the expectation that our relationship would be over when I moved away. And even though my contract was only for a 2-year period, 2 years is a long time for relationships, especially when you're in your late 20s. And I think the expectation from both of us was that, we would both move on. So we said goodbye to each other. She was actually the last person I said goodbye to before I left, and moved over. And we neither of us, I don't think, were holding on to. Well, first of all, we were not, officially in a relationship. We had dated before, and we were really good friends. But we're not committed to each other in that sense of being a boyfriend and a girlfriend. But I think we both mutually thought, like, okay, this is kind of where this ends, unfortunately. as soon as I landed in Germany, we basically started texting, and one thing that I soon realized is that iMessage works all around the world,
Mm.
and it doesn't matter if you have a German number or a US number. It's not an international SMS. It's all settled on the Apple proprietary network, and it's just as seamless, whether it's a iMessage or a FaceTime audio or a FaceTime call. It's just as seamless as being in the US. And so my wife and I basically, started texting and sort of rekindled our friendship that way, and it resulted in her coming out to visit me, and us realizing that, wait a second, maybe we can make this work.
Hmm.
Maybe a long distance relationship isn't as painful and isn't as much work as we both thought that it would be. So we gave it a try. Basically in November, I think 2 months after I had moved there, and said, "Hey, I'm coming home for Christmas. Let's just give this a try, and around Christmas time we'll reevaluate and see if it's what we want." And it turns out that it was exactly what we wanted, and we kept that going for the entire time that I was away. Obviously, it was not without its challenges.
Hmm.
Probably the biggest challenge is just making time for each other and speaking to each other, and sort of being involved in each other's lives while living literally on other sides of the world. Obviously, I'm an accountant. It's not the most glorious life in the world as far as day to day, what did you do today? How was your day kind of thing. So, I would say that sometimes, you don't necessarily have a lot of things to talk about with regard to your life, but we kept it going. And I think the big thing that kept us going is that we resolved to see each other about every 6 weeks to 8 weeks.
Hmm.
And sometimes she would come to Germany, sometimes I would go home to the U.S., and then other times we would meet in New York, meet in Costa Rica, meet in all different places.
Hmm.
And the one thing I'll say, I mentioned earlier study abroad, and how I didn't have that experience, and I you know I'm glad that I was able to live abroad as a working professional, because it just gives you sort of income and flexibility to
Yeah.
do things to do fun things that you wouldn't be able to do if you were on a shoestring budget.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a big difference. I mean, for me, it was going to China as a student after my semester in Singapore and going around for 2 weeks on very little money, no friends with me, didn't speak
Yeah.
any Chinese, trying to travel around, and super hard trip. And then I came back as a working professional, and I can tell you it was 180 degrees difference. It was a whole different experience. So I can definitely appreciate that. So you came back. You decided then, of course, to come back to the United States to continue with the same company. Did you have any issues with? Okay, now you're in that manager role. Of course, it's 2 years later, and you had to adjust your salary when you went there. So how did you get to come back? And did you have to readjust your salary and your title, or how did that work?
Yeah, yeah, great question. I did have to. So it was kind of a shoe in to come back at my new title, because I had basically been performing the role for 2 years already. So there was an approval process, but it was largely a formality. Salary negotiations, there was not much of a negotiation. They paid me what they paid me, and it was not great initially, considering I had already had 2 years in the role. They were basically paying me as a brand new manager,
Mm.
but those things tend to sort themselves out over time. So I have nothing really to complain about in that regard. But I would say the biggest adjustment coming back was going back to the U.S. work
Mm.
environment, workload, and sort of style of working. Because I went from 2 years of not having to work a single weekend, and typically working, probably the most I ever worked would be a 10-hour day maybe, to, I think, 3 weeks after I started back in the US, I had to work all night to get a
uh,
client issued.
yeah.
And that was my, like, welcome back to the US. Are you sure you want to be here kind of thing?
Did you have any thoughts of, oh, those days were so great back in Germany, maybe I can hit them up again? Or was it just kind of the adjustment that you had to go through, and after you adjusted and you had your all nighters, then you're back into it back in the US?
Well, I think that I think it was the kick in the butt I needed, because to be honest, I don't work all night very often. I think I've done it one or two other times, in the 3 years since I've been back. It is very rare, and it's usually avoidable. So in that sense, I guess it was just a lesson of getting back into the pace of things. But I'll say this: working culture is just it makes a difference. Like there's just less to do. There's less focus on deadlines and making a mountain out of a molehill. Germany, and I really appreciate that. And I've done everything I can to try to bring that mindset
Mm,
over to the US,
mm.
but obviously I'm one person, and it's hard to go against a working culture that has been built over decades.
Of course, that makes sense. Do you keep in touch with your German colleagues still, or is it really obviously now your focus is back on your US clients, but curious how that is?
Yeah, so I keep in touch with probably three or four individuals over there that I worked with. There was one guy I took a couple weekend trips with. We went to Ukraine together, and then just a couple others who remain with the company that I work for, and have gone through similar life changes that I have with regard to marriage and having
Mm.
kids. And yeah, they will be my friends for life. I would say that I don't keep in too close of a contact with them, but again, going back to iMessage, it's just so easy to send them a text and see how things are going, and we do keep in touch and try to stay involved in each other's lives.
That's great, man. Just as we wrap up here, I'm curious if you have any general parting advice for any other folks that would like to try to use their job through internal transfers, through deployments, through assignments, whatever you want to call it, to be able to get around the world.
Sure, sure. Well, I know I mentioned my former colleague who had met up in Dubai, but I'll say this: there is a small group of individuals who are able to make this happen on a consistent basis and work in all different countries. I mean, there's someone in my office right now who worked for my company in the Philippines, then Malta, then the UK, and now Los Angeles. And there are people who just make their career jumping from
Hmm.
country to country. And if that's what you want to do, this is a very good way to do it. When you have a company behind you that's helping you with all of the visas and moving expenses and things like that, definitely an approach that many maybe don't think about. It definitely takes some investment because you need to have that skill
Hmm.
and be in that position where other places can benefit from you. But I would encourage people that it's not as hard as you think. I mean, it took me, I would say, with the various programs that my firm offers, as an example, you can start in the US and you can be abroad within a year and a half,
Hmm.
basically,
Wow.
for some of these different rotation programs. And that's specific to my company, but applicable broadly within this profession and within this industry, is that there are just a lot of opportunities if you're willing to position yourself in a company to take advantage.
So I just want to actually change tack just slightly and see what the downsides are. I mean, I know I'm getting into this late in the conversation, but what I'm curious about is this idea that, for example, the colleague that you mentioned that's lived in all of these different countries. I think that's amazing. What I'm curious about
Right.
is, I know that, for example, you're trying to go indeed up the corporate ladder. Do you, not necessarily specific to this individual in your office, but in general, is it going to be more difficult for people that try to make so many moves to continue to move up the ladder, or do you not see that too much?
Certainly. And I believe that this is specific to my profession or industry, is that to keep moving up, you do need to put some roots down
Mm.
eventually. And so the question goes back to, are you happy with the position that you have? Because if I was happy with my manager level salary and responsibilities, which by the way I was, I mean, it afforded me a comfortable life in Germany, the ability to travel, all of that. If you're willing to stop there, then the world is your oyster. If you do want to keep moving up, which I'll tell you, it doesn't make you more happier or anything like that. Contentment is contentment, whether you have a little or you have a lot. But if you do want to move up, at some point you do need to settle down in one specific place.
Great. Thank you so much for your various feedback and advice. This has been an amazing conversation. Our listeners, is there anywhere in particular that they can look to find out more about you and what you're doing?
Absolutely. Well, I'm obviously on LinkedIn in a professional capacity, and would be happy to connect with anyone to discuss my career path or similar career paths and global opportunities. My email address is firstname.lastname at gmail.com. If if there are any other questions that come up. But I'd love to hear from listeners, and I'd also love to just connect with people that have similar interests that I do, and I'd love to hear about their experiences too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for appearing on the show. Love hearing your story. So glad that our listeners can hear it as well. Look forward to keeping in touch and talk to you soon. Hey guys, don't forget to like our video, subscribe to our channel, and leave your comment below. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Expat Empire. We help people to move abroad through our personalized consulting services. For more information, check out expatempire.com. Thanks and see you soon.